I talk a lot about the outer planets on this channel, and people may get confused by it, so this should make a good video explaining their significance. First, to understand what planets are, they're not just hunks of rock floating around the Earth. They carry energetic qualities which correspond in perfect lockstep with the things that happen on the Earth, such that basically everything that happens is predictable. And this is why astrology is most often used as a science of prediction. This is only possible because the planets contain an energy, and their movements move that same energy in us. And they also imbue us with their energy at birth to make up our being. And this is seen in how a natal chart explains the entire blueprint of your life. As they say, as above, so below. And this Hermetic doctrine, which almost everyone has heard, comes from the very same Hermes Trismegistus, who is the patron of all astrology, alchemy, and magic, demonstrating that he was mostly speaking about astrology in the first place when he said it, although it continues to be true in all things, and as within, so without. The planets are the hands of God, and storehouses for the different expressions of God's nature. A source of confusion may be the diverging definitions I give to the planets from what's commonly explained. This is largely because most definitions of the planets are observed through the lens of mundane astrology, the science of prediction of world events, and natal astrology, the science of how the configurations of the heavens make up the blueprint of your life and who you are. And these are more surface level understandings of the planets. The planets also have deeper astrotheological properties, and their deeper core principles are what help to understand the root of why they do what they do on all levels. For example, Pluto is popularly associated with transformation, evolution, power, and control. But that's only when Pluto's rays are intermingled into the soup of energies and subdivisions that make up our worldly experience. At an isolated core level, Pluto has a deeper principle that insists on a particular direction, and it's only when it's balanced against other forces and expressions that it turns into the expressions that are popularly observed in astrology. So I'm mainly talking in this post about the core astrotheological principles of the outer planets and how it relates to chosen ones, rather than the popularly observed expressions that are the end result of intermingling the various factors that create the end result of the things that happen on Earth, which we relate to the transits of particular planets. We can start with Saturn. Saturn, in an ascending soul, is related to atonement and self-mastery. It's the step that must come first, because Saturn is the bound that stops interconnectedness and union. And it must do this because God, as the Logos, must exclude all imperfection. Chris Langan says regarding God, quote, "God is good, and he must exclude evil to preserve the integrity of his identity," end quote. And this really strikes at the truth of the matter, although I wouldn't use the term good, maybe more so perfect or true. True in the sense of being of a path that leads to henosis and perfection, as opposed to outcomes that cause dysfunction. And so Saturn is exclusionary, and it says no, because God can't allow imperfection to remain joined with it. It must exclude the imperfect by its nature. And so Saturn, through its trials, perfects. And this necessary first step must come before all dynamics of unity, because all unity and henosis is destined to be short-lived and temporary, because God must reject imperfections from itself. When the soul comes into its perfect nature, Saturn becomes very permissive of allowing the soul past its walls to be reinitiated into union and to move past Saturn's blockades of limitation. But you first have to pass Saturn's quality control and to be perfected. Regarding Uranus. Uranus in an ascending soul is related to the union of opposites. It allows you to see the interconnectedness of all things and how everything is a part in a single system that's all connected and works together. And this is the vision of the heavenly chorus, and that every individual thing all moves as one, as part of this chorus where all of the different parts make up the single whole. It's being able to see the road up and the road down, and notice how it's ultimately just one road. Similarly, being able to see the hot and cold and the up and down and the positive and negative. In our manner of speaking, on the Taijitu yin-yang symbol, the Saturnian understanding is that things are black and white and that there are dualities. But at the Uranus level of understanding, you see that the white is in the black and the black is in the white. This is a heavy blow to the experience of an individual self, because Uranus rules a sign opposite the one ruled by the sun. Uranus makes it very hard to see life as an individual. Rather, it puts you into a state where you recognize yourself as a part of an interconnected community of agents which all contain their own creative possibility. With Uranus, you can see yourself in the collective, and the collective in yourself. So every action you take is creative potential set to a particular use. And with this unity mindset, it makes the most sense to continually be of service. Because to be of service to others is to be of service to yourself. And they're all one thing. And so this is essentially where a lot of the characters of the heavens, as we typically know them, are located. Like angels, a chorus of angels all working together, a community. And as a higher self, you're appointed a, quote, holy guardian angel, or personal diamond, to help guide you back into this heavenly state of creative possibility, guided by the Logos Pragmaticos. On Neptune. Neptune, in an ascending soul, is more related to rest. It dissolves all identity back into the monad, or the one. It doesn't recognize the interconnectedness of all things, because it's blind to all things and distinctions. There's no sense of separation or categories, because Neptune dissolves everything into a oneness. In the same way that the ocean is one thing rather than trillions of droplets of water comprising it. Neptune is the dreaming god, which contains all possibility. And in a dream, anything can happen. But Neptune at the level of God's function can be understood by comparing someone you may know who has all kinds of dreams but doesn't do anything to make it a reality. They're content with the dreams just being dreams. There's no impulse towards realization or creation. Uranus holds that manic creativity, that manic compulsion to introduce change through the realization of new possibilities in the world. Neptune just rests as a storehouse of all possibility until some of that possibility is possessed by Uranus' impulse for manic creation. And then it becomes creative potential in motion as Chokhmah. If Uranus in the yin-yang is the white and black and the black and white, Neptune can't actually be found on the yin-yang symbol at all, because the yin-yang taijutsu symbol is a depiction of taiji, which is the original separation of duality as the ridgepole. So it depicts duality. Whereas Neptune is related to the Wuji without ridgepole, which is a state of non-dual infinite potential. Wuji means the infinite. Uranus moves manically and wildly between duality and non-duality to understand the interconnectedness of both. Neptune has no level of understanding of separations of any kind. Everything just is, or more accurately, isness can possibly be. Again, isness can possibly be. Neptune is associated with Keter, and Keter's divine name in Kabbalah is Eye Asher Eye, meaning I will be, or what I will be what I will be. And this is the name that's given to Moses in the book of Exodus when he asks what God's name is. It's the initial genesis of the dreaming God that gives birth to the mere possibility of isness. One reason Neptune can be associated with rest is that it just dissolves everything. And because stories rely on differentiation and words, logos, the word, and it relies on syntax, Mercury rules Virgo, opposite Pisces, ruled by Neptune. Effectively, no real stories can be told in this state of dissolution. A Neptunian or Keteric state is essentially the ultimate goal of henosis, to be rejoined with God absolutely with no separations or divisions, to be absolutely engulfed into and subsumed by God with no separations between, and the spiritual ecstasy associated with that. This is again the value of Saturn, because that henosis can only be maintained when you have perfect nature and can exist in alignment with God's perfection. Otherwise, to be excluded due to imperfections which need to be processed, continuing the need for reincarnation. This level of consciousness requires an additional level of surrender such that there is no impulse to creation. Otherwise, the manic impulse for creation and for stories to be told will have you remain at a Uranian level of consciousness, bouncing between Saturn and Neptune, bouncing as manic creative potential, as Chokhmah, between Keter and Binah. Neptune dissolves the story and brings the story to a close. This is why it rules Pisces, which is the end of the zodiac, as an alternative path. Because if one's relation to Pisces is at the level of the Jupiter, which also rules Pisces, it simply continues its progression to Aries as Mars, coming after Jupiter. Whereas this alternative fork in the road, beginning at Aquarius as Uranus, as the second co-ruler, continues in Pisces as Neptune, as essentially the secret second road, which shows you the way out of the cycle rather than continuing it. Neptune then is the surrender to rest in dissolution of all stories, the end result of relentless meditation and empty-mindedness to dissolve the contents of the mind. Neptune works towards the one, but Pluto can be puzzling because it works towards the zero. Neptune is about dissolving all separations to exist in a soup of potential. Pluto seeks things absolute, and therefore seeks absolute death and absolute rebirth. Therefore, Pluto works towards complete emptiness. It's a progression inward that works to remove all attachments in the way of emptiness, all obstacles towards the nothingness. It even seeks the end of possibility itself. In Kabbalah, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as Binah, Chokhmah, and Keter, I should say, in Kabbalah, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as Chokhmah, Keter, and Da'at can be thought of as expressions of God, which work towards the Ein Sof Ar, the Ein Sof, and the Ein, respectively. Uranus works as the Ein Sof Ar, which translates to limitless light, and represents the first manifestation of the divine emanating from Ein Sof. It is considered the aura or radiant energy of Ein Sof and is the possibility of God such that it can emanate out. And this is reflected in the fact that Uranus is generally invisible, but sometimes can become visible and therefore make contact with things manifest. I like to view Uranus becoming situationally visible as the situational injections of new possibility and quote-unquote randomness that passes off the baton to Saturn to organize it. Neptune relates to the Ein Sof, which translates to limitless or without end, and signifies the boundless and infinite divine essence before any self-manifestation. It is analogous to the Greek concept of the apeiron, and being limitless and without end is essentially a direct reflection of the concept of Wuji in Taoism. Finally, Pluto works towards Ein, which translates to nothingness or not, and represents the absolute, undifferentiated, and unmanifest source. It is often contrasted with Yesh, meaning, quote, there is, or, quote, existence. This can be understood as the difference between dreams and death. We die a little death every day when we sleep, and every day we are born anew. But we're just dreaming. The capital D death is when our time here is officially finished. And Pluto's relentless march inward to singularity eventually becomes so extreme that it even nullifies possibility. If Neptune is dream sleep, Pluto is dreamless sleep, total blackness and emptiness. And this relates to, in Buddhism, the emptiness of sunyata. Mars is related to divorce, and Pluto, as the higher octave of Mars, is essentially complete divorce from the entire simulation. Divorce from consciousness and divorce from all possible experience. But the funny thing about ascending versus descending nature is that all planets both work in both directions depending on if you're ascending or descending. Pluto isn't just what works towards plucking you out of consciousness to give you complete death and blackness. It's also what tempts blackness and nothingness into the realm of possibility. Pluto, as the Ouroboros serpent, tempts nothingness into maybiness, and then into somethingness, as a cycle of infinite creation and evolution. Pluto, as a storehouse for that element of God we call Ein, answers the question of why there is something instead of nothing. And so, in being the force, and being the force that draws you away from all things into inwardness so deep that oneness becomes zero, as well as the temptress, which seduces nothingness into the realm of possibility, Pluto is ultimately responsible for all stories that are told. And evolution is simply all the paths between complete outwardness and complete inwardness. I'll repeat that. Evolution is simply all the paths between complete outwardness and complete inwardness. That's the relation of inward involution. I don't mean to say inward involution, but involution versus evolution. It's outwardness versus inwardness. As a singularity, no stories can be told because the universe hasn't universed yet. And having achieved absolute outwardness and having all energy dispersed equally, creating the heat death of the universe, no further stories can be told because the universe has no energy to make anything move. So the Logos begins with Pluto. It's the word God speaks into existence out of non-existence, so stories can be told and evolution can occur. And therefore Pluto is the Ouroboros serpent that presides over all creation, creating and destroying, and creating and destroying. Destroying possibility and creating possibility from nothingness. It's the force that penetrates through everything and draws everything inward to a singularity. And then it releases its grip completely for the soul to descend into outwardness. And then it regains its grip and pulls it back into absolute singularity. The Big Bang, and then the Big Crunch. In, out, in, out. The breath of the universe. Ascending soul and descending soul. The Ouroboros runs through everything. And evolution is the unstoppable force that governs all creation. And because all incarnation ultimately begins with Pluto, that means all existence is governed by evolution as its ultimate principle. And everything else will always be secondary at best, and will always have to yield ground and give way to evolution as the more dominant principle that makes things move.